Merlin is a legendary figure best known as the wizard featured in Arthurian legend. The standard depiction of the character first appears in Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae, written c. 1136, and is based on an amalgamation of previous historical and legendary figures. Geoffrey combined existing stories of Myrddin Wyllt, a North Brythonic prophet and madman with no connection to King Arthur, with tales of the Romano-British war leader Ambrosius Aurelianus to form the composite figure he called Merlin Ambrosius. He is allegedly buried in the Broceliande forest, near Pampont in Britanniae. Geoffrey's rendering of the character was immediately popular, especially in Wales. Later writers expanded the account to produce a fuller image of the wizard. Merlin's traditional biography casts him as a Cambion, born of a mortal woman, sired by an incubus, the non-human from whom he inherits his supernatural powers and abilities. The name of Merlin's mother is not usually stated but is given as Adon in the oldest version of the prose brood. Merlin matures to an ascendant sagehood and engineers the birth of Arthur through magic and intrigue. Later authors have Merlin serve as the king's advisor until he is bewitched and imprisoned by the Lady of the Lake. Name and etymology. The name Merlin is derived from the Welsh Myrddin, the name of the bard Myrddin Wyllt, one of the chief sources for the later legendary figure. Geoffrey of Monmouth Latinized the name to Merlinus in his works. Medievalist Gaston Paris suggests that Geoffrey chose the form Merlinus rather than the regular Myrddinus to avoid a resemblance to the Anglo-Norman word myrd for feces. Class Myrddina. Merlin's enclosure is an early name for Great Britain stated in the third series of Welsh triads. Celticist A.O.H. Jarman suggests that the Welsh name Myrddin was derived from the toponym Caerfyrddin, the Welsh name from the town known in English as Carmarthen. This contrasts with the popular folk etymology that the town was named for the bard. The name Carmarthen is derived from the town's previous Roman name Moridunum, itself derived from Celtic Brythonic *Moridunum, sea fortress. Later adaptations of the legend. Several decades later, the poet Robert de Boron retold this material in his poem Merlin. Only a few lines of the poem have survived, but a prose retelling became popular and was later incorporated into two other romances. In Robert's account, as in Geoffrey's Historia, Merlin is begotten by a demon on a virgin as an intended antichrist. This plot is thwarted when the expectant mother informs her confessor Blaise of her predicament. They immediately baptize the boy at birth, thus freeing him from the power of Satan. The demonic legacy invests Merlin with a preternatural knowledge of the past and present, which is supplemented by God, who gives the boy a prophetic knowledge of the future. Robert de Boron lays great emphasis on Merlin's power to shape-shift, on his joking personality, and on his connection to the Holy Grail. This text introduces Merlin's master Blaise, who is pictured as writing down Merlin's deeds, explaining how they came to be known and preserved. Robert was inspired by Wace's Roman de Bruges, an Anglo-Norman adaptation of Geoffrey's Historia. Robert's poem was rewritten in prose in the 12th century as the Histoire de Merlin, also called the Vulgata prose Merlin. It was originally attached to a cycle of prose versions of Robert's poems, which tells the story of the Holy Grail, brought from the Middle East to Britain by followers of Joseph of Arimathea. The Grail is eventually recovered by Arthur's knight Percival. The prose Merlin contains many instances of Merlin's shape-shifting. He appears as a woodcutter with an axe about his neck, big shoes, a torn coat, bristly hair, and a large beard. He is later found in the forest of Northumberland by a follower of others disguised as an ugly man and tending a great herd of beasts. He then appears first as a handsome man and then as a beautiful boy. Years later, he approaches Arthur disguised as a peasant wearing leather boots, a wool coat, a hood, and a belt of knotted sheepskin. He is described as tall, black and bristly, and as seeming cruel and fierce. Finally, he appears as an old man with a long beard, short and hunchbacked, in an old torn woolen coat, who carries a club and drives a multitude of beasts before him. The prose Merlin later came to serve as a sort of prequel to the vast Lancelot Grail, also known as the Vulgate Cycle. The authors of that work expanded it with the Vulgate Suite.Do Merlin, which describes King Arthur's early adventures. The prose Merlin was also used as a prequel to the later post-Vulgate cycle, the authors of which added their own continuation, the Foot Merlin, a post-Vulgate Suite.Do Merlin. In the Livre d'Artis, Merlin enters Rome in the form of a huge stag with a white forefoot. He bursts into the presence of Julius Caesar and tells the emperor that only the wild man of the woods can interpret the dream that has been troubling him. Later, he returns in the form of a black, shaggy man, barefoot, with a torn coat. In another episode, he decides to do something that will be spoken of forever. Going into the forest of Broceliande, he transforms himself into a herdsman carrying a club and wearing a wolf skin and leggings. He is large, bent, black, lean, hairy, and old, and his ears hang down to his waist. His head is as big as a buffalo's, his hair is down to his waist, he has a hump on his back, his feet and hands are backwards, he's hideous, and is over 18 feet tall. By his arts, he calls a herd of deer to come and graze around him. These works were adapted and translated into several other languages. The post-Vulgate suite was the inspiration for the early parts of Sir Thomas Malory's English language La Morte d'Arthur. Many later medieval works also deal with the Merlin legend. Italy's The Prophecies of Merlin contains long prophecies of Merlin, some by his ghost after his death. The prophecies are interspersed with episodes relating Merlin's deeds and with various Arthurian adventures in which Merlin does not appear at all. The earliest English verse romance concerning Merlin is Arthur and Merlin, which drew from the Chronicles and the French Lancelot Grail. As the Arthurian myths were retold and embellished, Merlin's prophetic aspects were sometimes emphasized in favor of portraying him as a wizard and elder advisor to Arthur. On the other hand, in the Lancelot Grail it is said that Merlin was never baptized and never did any good in his life, only evil. Medieval Arthurian tales abound in inconsistencies. A manuscript found in Bath from the 1420s simply records a Merlin as having helped Uther Pendragon with his subtleness or subtleness, presumably but not necessarily magic. His role could be embellished and added to that of Aurelianus Ambrosius, or he could be made into one of old others' favourite advisors and naught more. In the Lancelot Grail and later accounts, Merlin's eventual downfall came from his lusting after a huntress named Niviane, who was the daughter of the King of Northumberland. In the Suite.Do Merlin, for example, Niviane is about to depart from Arthur's court, but, with some encouragement from Merlin, Arthur asks her to stay in his castle with the Queen. During her stay, Merlin falls in love with her and desires her. Niviane, frightened that Merlin might take advantage of her with his spells, swears that she will never love him unless he swears to teach her all of his magic. Merlin consents, unaware that throughout the course of her lessons, Niviane will use Merlin's own powers against him, forcing him to do her bidding. When Niviane finally goes back to her country, Merlin escorts her. However, along the way, Merlin receives the vision that Arthur is in need of assistance against the schemes of Morgan Le Fay. Niviane and Merlin rush back to Arthur's castle, but have to stop from the night in a stone chamber chamber once inhabited by two lovers. Merlin relates that when the lovers died, they were placed in a magic tomb within a room in the chamber. At night, while Merlin is asleep, Vivian, still disgusted with Merlin's desire for her, as well as his demonic heritage, casts a spell over him and places him in the magic tomb so that he can never escape, thus causing his death. Merlin's death is recounted differently in other versions of the narrative. The enchanted prison is variously described as a cave, a large rock, an invisible tower, or a tree. In his book, The Meaning of Trees, Botany, History, Healing, Law, Fred Hageneder writes on page 149, according to Breton legend, the legendary wise man Merlin climbed the pine of Barrington, just as shamans climbed the world tree. Here, he had a profound revelation and he never returned to the mortal world. In later versions, Merlin's glass tan was mistranslated as a glass house. It is actually a living tree, green and tan, sacred tree, and from these words the name of Glastonbury, in Somerset, England, is sometimes derived. Hence, according to legend, it is a sacred tree in which the soul of Merlin awaits his return. In the Prophetiae Merlini, Vivian confines him in the forest of Broceliande with walls of air, visible as mist to others but as a beautiful tower to him. This is unfortunate for Arthur, who has lost his greatest counselor. Another version has it that Merlin angers Arthur to the point where he beheads, cuts in half, burns, and curses Merlin. In modern fiction, Asteroid, a main-belt asteroid, is named 2598 Merlin in honor of the legendary wizard. Possible historicity. Nikolai Tolstoy hypothesizes that Merlin is based on a historical personage, probably a 6th-century druid living in southern Scotland. His argument is based on the fact that early references to Merlin describe him as possessing characteristics which modern scholarship would recognize as druidical, the inference being that those characteristics were not invented by the early chroniclers, but belonged to a real person. If so, the hypothetical Merlin would have lived about a century after the hypothetical historical Arthur. A late version of the Annales Cambrian, influenced by Geoffrey of Monmouth's fictional Historia Regum Britanniae, records for the year AD 573, that after the Battle of Afdereth, between the sons of Elifa and Gwendolau son of Cedio, in which battle Gwendolau fell, Merlin went mad. The earliest version of the Annales Cambrian entry, as well as a later copy, do not mention Merlin. Bibliography. Oxford English Dictionary. 2008. Retrieved June 7, 2010. Arbroeder Jubenval H. Merlin est-il un personnage historique? Reviewed as Questions Historiques 5, 1868. Breton Guy, Naomi, Merlin l'Enchanteur dans les images de la Renaissance Arthurienne, 2006. Cadia La Rochelle, José pour forger un mythe, Les Avatars de Merlin, 1996. Castleton, Rodney, King Arthur, The Truth Behind the Legend, London, New York, G. Routledge, 2000. Donard, Anna, Merlin, l'Intermédiaire des Mondes, Minas Federal University. Dumézil, Georges, Mythes et des Indo-Europeans Flammarion, 1992. Gaster, M., The Legend of Merlin, a Postscript, Folklore, 1905. Gaster, M., The Legend of Merlin, Folklore, 1905. Jill, N.S., Who Was Merlin and Was Merlin Real? Ancient Classical History, http, ancienthhistory.com/cs/people/a/merlin_2.htm. 2007. Heather, P.J., Divination, Folklore, 1954. Hersit, Theodore, Myrddin l'Enchanteur Merlin. Son Histoire, says Uvers, Son Influence Paris, Terre de Brume, 1989. Holdstock, Robert Legrand-De, Paris, Pocket, 2006. Joe, Jimmy, Timeless Myths, The Many Faces of Merlin, http www.timelessmyths.com, Arthurian, Merlin, html, 2007. Koch, John T. Celtic Culture, A Historical Encyclopedia. ABC Clio. ISBN 1851094407. Retrieved November 23, 2009. Lacroix, Arnaud, Arthur, Merlin et le Graal, Unmarred Revisit, Monaco, Editions du Rocher, 2001. Norris J. Lacey, New Arthurian Encyclopedia, Th. Taylor and Amp, Francis. ISBN 9780824043773. Loomis, Roger Sherman. Celtic Myth and Arthurian Romance. Columbia University Press. Monmouth, Geoffrey. The History of the Kings of Britain. The Romance of Arthur. Ed. James J. Wilhelm. New York, Garland Publishing, 1994. 63-93. Ryder, Jeff. The Fictional Margin. The Merlin of the Brute. Modern Philology, 1989, University of Chicago Press. Torregrossa, Michael A. Merlin Goes to the Movies. The Changing Role of Merlin in Cinema Arthuriana. Film in AMP History, an interdisciplinary journal of film and television studies, 29.3-4, 54-65. Torregrossa, Michael A. The Way of the Wizard, Reflections of Merlin on Film. Quote, in the medieval hero on screen, representations from Beowulf to Buffy, eds. Martha W. Driver and Sid Ray. Jefferson, N.C., McFarland, 2004. pp. 167-91.